Karen slapped my blind cousin. Didn't know she was being filmed by everyone. It was one of those perfectly sunny Saturdays where everything felt like it was falling into place. And for once, I was grateful to be outdoors. My cousin Tasha had been asking to go to the Riverside Plaza for weeks, and since the weather was finally playing nice, we figured it was the perfect time to grab some smoothies, do a little light shopping, and just hang out. Tasha's legally blind, has been since she was a kid, and she uses a white mobility cane when we're out in public. But if you ever met her, you'd quickly forget she's blind at all. She's that kind of person who's mastered confidence, whose sense of humor cuts through awkwardness like a blade. She walks with a kind of graceful rhythm, tapping her cane confidently, and has this uncanny ability to memorize spatial layouts quickly. I've always admired that about her. Still, as much as she's independent, I usually tag along to help with any unexpected things. And unfortunately, one of those unexpected things just so happened to be lurking nearby that day. We had just gotten our drinks from a little tropical smoothie booth near the fountain, and we were slowly making our way toward the bookstore at the corner of the plaza. Tasha was to my left, chatting about this podcast she'd been listening to, some mystery drama with voice actors she liked, and I was half listening, half scanning the crowd. Riverside Plaza wasn't exactly jam-packed, but it wasn't quiet either. It was the kind of place you'd expect to find teenagers hanging out, families grabbing lunch, and elderly couples enjoying their afternoon walk. Nothing really prepared me for the sheer level of entitlement that was about to unfold. At first, I barely noticed the woman who walked by us. She was about 5'5", maybe in her late 40s, wearing one of those wide-brimmed sun hats that screams, "I vacation in wine country," and large sunglasses that practically covered her whole face. Her blonde hair was stiff with hairspray, and she clutched a little designer purse like it was made of gold. She brushed past us a little too close for comfort, and Tasha's cane, which she always sweeps lightly in front of her, accidentally tapped against the woman's shin. Not hard, not even enough to trip someone, just a tap. The woman suddenly stopped and turned around like she'd been assaulted. "Excuse me," she snapped. I glanced at her, a little confused, unsure if she was speaking to us or someone else, but Tasha instinctively turned her head in her direction. "Sorry," Tasha said politely, still holding her smoothie in one hand, her cane in the other. "You hit me with that stick," the woman barked, pointing at the cane like it was a samurai sword. Now look, I've had plenty of strange interactions in public, who hasn't? But this one immediately sent a red flag up my spine. I stepped in. "She's blind," I said evenly. "That's her mobility cane." "Well, maybe blind people shouldn't be waving weapons around where they can hurt others," she snapped back. I blinked. I literally didn't know how to respond to that at first because it was so wildly out of line. My brain was still processing whether she was serious or just having a bad day and decided to lash out at the most convenient target. But Tasha, being the angel she is, tried to de-escalate. She always does. "I'm really sorry if I bumped you," Tasha said calmly, even though she had absolutely no reason to apologize. "I didn't realize someone was that close. I used the cane to find obstacles, not to hit people." Instead of accepting the apology and walking away like a normal person, the woman took a step closer, her voice getting louder and more theatrical, as if she wanted an audience. "Well, maybe you need to watch where you're swinging it around. I could have been injured. That thing should be illegal." I couldn't help myself. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh, and I wasn't alone. A couple standing nearby had turned their heads. A teenager sitting on a bench lowered her earbuds. People were starting to notice, and the woman seemed to feed off it. "It's a white cane," I said, keeping my voice even. "They're literally a standard tool for visually impaired people. It's not a weapon." "Oh, you think I don't know that?" she shrieked, clearly spiraling now. "People fake all kinds of things these days to get attention." Tasha's expression changed at that. I saw it. Her smile disappeared and her shoulders tensed. I knew she was trying hard not to let this woman get to her, but you could practically feel the weight of that accusation settle in the air. Tasha had fought hard for her independence. She didn't need some stranger suggesting she was faking a condition that made her life 10 times harder every single day. "Ma'am," Tasha said, her voice now firm but still incredibly polite, "I'm not interested in an argument. Please just move along." That's when the woman, whom I'll now refer to as Karen because she really earned that title, took another aggressive step forward. She raised her voice to a near scream. "Don't tell me what to do, little girl. Someone has to say something when public safety is at risk." I glanced around, and that's when I saw it. People were starting to record. A teenage boy sitting on a nearby bench had his phone up. A woman in yoga pants standing near the smoothie stand had already started filming. Even a guy with a stroller had his phone tilted discreetly in our direction. You know how it is these days. Anytime someone starts acting wild in public, phones go up like it's an instinct. Karen didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she thought she was in the right and didn't care. Either way, she was putting on a show now, gesturing wildly and pointing at Tasha like she was trying to get her arrested for brandishing a plastic lightsaber. I stepped between them, partially shielding Tasha, who had gone completely quiet. Her lips were pressed tight, and I could tell she was breathing a little faster. This wasn't the first time someone treated her differently because of her blindness, but it was definitely the loudest and most public example of it. "We're not doing this," I said. "Back off, lady." That was probably the wrong move, trying to stand my ground, because Karen took it as a challenge. She looked at me like I'd insulted her honor. But before she could escalate further, I heard the teenager filming say loudly, "Yo, she's really out here yelling at a blind girl in broad daylight. What is wrong with people?" That one line was like flipping a switch. Suddenly, Karen's posture changed. You could tell she realized that other people were watching, really watching and documenting everything she said and did. She glanced around, her head swiveling as she registered the cameras. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. Her pride wouldn't let her retreat. And in that moment, I just knew something worse was about to happen. Karen's eyes darted around like a trapped animal. The panic was subtle at first, but I saw it. Her jaw clenched, and her sunglasses slipped just slightly down her nose, revealing eyes wide with a mix of indignation and dawning realization. Everyone around us had their phones out, capturing her every word, every flailing gesture. Yet instead of retreating, instead of apologizing or taking a breath, she did what entitled people do when they feel cornered. She attacked. It happened so quickly, yet it felt like slow motion. Tasha, still holding her cane loosely in her left hand, was standing quietly beside me, trying to maintain composure. Karen took one sharp step forward and smacked Tasha's arm with an open palm, a loud, skin-on-skin crack that immediately silenced the surrounding chatter. Her cane clattered to the pavement, spinning slightly before stopping against the toe of someone's shoe. Tasha let out a startled gasp, instinctively stepping back, disoriented and vulnerable without her cane, the one tool she relied on to navigate the world around her. The moment her hand connected with Tasha's arm, the entire plaza changed. It was like the volume had been turned down to 0 and the temperature dropped by 10 degrees. For a split second, no one moved, no one even breathed. Then came the collective inhale, the murmurs of disbelief, the indignant cries of strangers who had seen the whole thing with their own eyes, and more importantly, caught it all on camera. "She hit her," someone shouted. "She just hit a blind girl," another voice rang out. People surged forward now, not physically aggressive but emotionally charged, their phones still recording but their faces etched with shock, disgust, and anger. I bent down immediately, picking up the white cane and handing it back to Tasha, who was blinking rapidly, trying to stay calm even though I could see her hand trembling. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I barked at Karen, my voice louder than I intended. She took a half step back, arms still defensive as though we were the ones assaulting her. "She hit me with that thing first," Karen shrieked, but even she knew her words had no weight. The boy with the phone who'd been filming from the start shook his head in disbelief and said loudly, "Now we got it all. She barely tapped your leg and you full-on slapped her. You're done." Karen spun toward him, perhaps ready to lash out again, but the look on his face stopped her. He wasn't just filming, he was livid. And he wasn't alone. A woman wearing scrubs, who had clearly just come from a hospital shift, stepped forward with her arms crossed. "Lady, you just assaulted someone with a disability, in public, with 50 witnesses. Your lucky people are only recording and not restraining you right now." Karen, sensing the tide turning, tried to regain control, though her voice cracked as she shouted, "I felt threatened. That cane was being used like a weapon. I have every right to protect myself." Her argument sounded even more absurd in the face of reality, and the more she spoke, the more she buried herself. Tasha, to her credit, straightened her shoulders and spoke softly but firmly. "You hit me because you refuse to believe I'm blind. I don't owe you proof of my disability. My cane is not a weapon, it's my eyes." The simplicity of her words carried more weight than all of Karen's frantic shouting combined. A hush fell again, like even the bystanders needed a second to take in the dignity with which Tasha responded. That's when a tall man in a business suit, holding a phone in one hand and a coffee in the other, stepped forward and calmly said, "I've called the police. They're on their way." Karen's face blanched. "You're calling the police on me? I was defending myself." She shrieked again, but her voice cracked and lost momentum the longer she looked around and saw the faces staring back. No one siding with her, no one offering her even a sliver of support. At that moment, Karen made the decision to flee. She turned on her heel and started speed walking toward the parking lot, trying to move quickly without it looking like she was running, hopping perhaps, that the situation could still be salvaged if she disappeared. But she wasn't going to get far. A man and his girlfriend casually stepped in front of her, not touching her but blocking her exit just long enough for someone else to cut her off from behind. "Where you going, Karen?" someone called out. "You're a viral video now," another voice laughed. It was both surreal and chilling to see how quickly the crowd moved, not in an angry mob way, but in a deeply unified, morally outraged way, like the entire community had collectively decided, "Not today." Karen turned around and her expression was raw now. No more bravado, just panic. "Let me through," she pleaded. "I didn't do anything wrong." Her words fell on deaf ears. By now, I could hear sirens in the distance, short, sharp whoops of a nearby patrol unit approaching quickly. It was the kind of sound that instantly changed a situation from chaotic to official. Karen froze in place, then finally dropped her arms to her sides and muttered something under her breath, something about lawyers and fake disabilities. I guided Tasha to a nearby bench and had her sit down, placing her cane gently across her lap. She leaned in toward me and whispered, "Are you okay?" I almost laughed. She had just been struck and humiliated, and she was asking if I was okay. "I should be asking you that," I said, rubbing her back lightly. She gave me a small smile but said nothing more. A moment later, 2 officers arrived, approached the crowd, and the energy shifted again. A wave of people pointed in unison at Karen, and one of the officers calmly asked her to step aside so they could talk. She tried weakly to argue, but the phones were already being shown to the second officer, who nodded grimly as he watched the footage. I didn't know what Karen thought was going to happen that day when she decided to escalate a non-issue, but I'm pretty sure being publicly shamed, arrested, and turned into the villain of 100 TikTok videos wasn't on her to-do list. The crowd slowly began to thin as the officers took statements. A few people approached Tasha and offered words of support. One older woman brought her a bottle of water. A teenager handed me his Instagram handle, saying if we needed the footage, he had the whole thing in 4K in that moment. For all the horror of what had just happened, I felt something powerful, community. Strangers had stepped up when it mattered. And Karen, well, she was finally starting to understand what happens when you let entitlement override empathy in a world full of smartphones. The plaza had returned to a strange kind of quiet, the kind that settles over a place after the storm has passed, but the damage still lingers in the air. The officers had taken our statements, reviewed the footage from no less than 4 different angles, and placed Karen in the back of the cruiser with handcuffs clasped around her wrists. She hadn't gone quietly, of course. There were loud declarations of innocence, furious proclamations about knowing her rights, and more than one vague threat about suing everyone within a 10-foot radius. But none of it mattered. The evidence was too solid, the witnesses too numerous, and the truth too obvious. What she had done, lashing out in public, slapping a blind woman for simply using the tool that helped her walk, was indefensible. Still, as she sat in the squad car, her face twisted with disbelief and rage, the consequences of her actions had only just begun to unfold. As the crowd dispersed, people lingered to talk in hushed voices, phones still in hand, footage already uploaded or being edited for TikTok, Instagram Reels, and Twitter. I overheard someone saying they'd already stitched the video with a trending soundbite. Another girl in a hoodie said she was posting it to a subreddit called Our Public Freakout. One guy standing near the fountain, who had earlier cheered when Karen got cuffed, said the footage was probably going viral as they spoke. And he wasn't wrong. Less than an hour after the incident, I checked my phone and saw a video titled, "Karen Slaps Blind Woman Over Cane, Instantly Regrets It," already racking up tens of thousands of views. The thumbnail was a freeze frame of Karen's furious face, mouth mid-yell, with the caption in bold white letters, "It's a weapon." Tasha sat beside me on the bench, sipping the bottled water someone had given her earlier, her movements slow but steady. She had regained some of her calm, but I could tell her mind was still reeling. The slap itself had rattled her less than the idea that someone could be so aggressively ignorant, so cruel in their self-righteousness, that they'd justify attacking a disabled person in broad daylight. She said very little, just nodded along when I mentioned the video going up, and offered a small shrug when I joked that she might end up on national news. But there was something in her silence, a kind of exhausted reflection, like she was still trying to make sense of how things had gone from casual afternoon stroll to viral internet drama in under 10 minutes. It wasn't long before our phones started lighting up, texts from friends who'd already seen the video, DMs from people we hadn't spoken to in years, and even a few messages from reporters asking if we wanted to share our side of the story. I was overwhelmed by it, but Tasha stayed composed. She politely declined most of the requests, but she did allow me to post a brief statement on her behalf, something simple and direct. "Yes, the woman in the video hit me. I'm okay. Thank you for your concern. My cane is not a weapon. It's my independence. Be kind out there." That was all she needed to say. Within minutes, the post had gone semi-viral on its own, retweeted by a few disability rights advocates and picked up by a few social media watchdog accounts. The internet was awake now, and it was hungry. Karen, however, wasn't just being shamed in our plaza anymore. Her face was now a symbol. People online were calling her Cane Karen and editing the footage into memes, adding dramatic music and red circles with arrows pointing to her wild gestures. Some uploaded the moment of the slap with slow motion effects and captions like, "When entitlement backfires." Others made reaction videos, feigning outrage or mocking disbelief. And then came the internet detectives. It's always the next step. Within an hour, someone had dug up her full name, linked her Facebook account, and posted a screenshot of her profile picture with the caption, "This you." Her employer was quickly identified from her social media activity. She worked for a mid-sized real estate agency that prided itself on community values. That alone made her actions all the more ironic and outrageous to the public eye. By the time we got back to my apartment, it felt like the world had shifted. The notifications on my phone were nonstop. People I hadn't spoken to since college were sending me links and asking, "Is this your cousin?" A few had already sent screenshots of news articles. Local outlets were picking up the story, and some national ones were starting to ask questions. The footage had made it to Reddit, specifically EntitledPeople, where it had become the top post within 2 hours. The title read, "Karen slaps blind girl because she thought her cane was a weapon, gets instant justice." The comments were a mix of pure rage, disbelief, and admiration for how calmly Tasha had handled the whole thing. People were sharing their own stories of dealing with cairns, with one top comment reading, "Entitlement like this isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. Glad the girl is okay. This cairn needs consequences." That comment had over 50,000 upvotes before I could even finish reading the thread. Tasha scrolled through some of the videos silently, not interacting with any of them, just watching. Her expression was unreadable for a while until she turned to me and said softly, "It's weird seeing myself from the outside like this, like I'm watching someone else." I nodded, not quite knowing what to say. "You were amazing," I finally offered. "I mean it. You kept it together while this grown woman had a public meltdown." Tasha gave me a small, weary smile. I didn't feel amazing. I felt small. That hit me harder than anything else. In all the chaos, in all the righteous internet fury and public vindication, it was easy to forget that for her, it hadn't been entertainment. It had been fear, confusion, the feeling of being targeted not just as a person, but as someone society already often overlooks or patronizes. Still, even if she didn't feel strong in that moment, the world saw her as something more, not a victim, but a figure of quiet resilience. The videos continued to gain traction. News outlets began calling the slap a symbolic moment of ableism in public spaces. Disability rights organizations started using it to promote awareness. And Karen, well, her employer released a statement less than 24 hours later. It was short and brutal. "We have reviewed the footage of our employee involved in a recent altercation. Effective immediately, she is no longer affiliated with our company. We do not condone violence or discrimination of any kind." Just like that, Karen lost her job. The internet cheered. And yet, for all the noise and attention, what stayed with me the most was the moment when Tasha gently picked up her cane, stood tall again, and walked out of that plaza with her head high. Not because she had something to prove to Karen or to the crowd, but because she'd already fought bigger battles just by existing in a world that often sees disability as inconvenience. The slap would fade from the internet eventually. The memes would stop. The outrage would move on to the next viral moment. But for me, and for Tasha, something lasting had been etched into that day. The quiet strength of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard, and the echo of justice that followed her every step. The following morning, we woke up to chaos, not the bad kind, but the kind that makes your head spin because everything feels so surreal, like the internet had decided to rewrite reality overnight. My phone was already buzzing nonstop before I even opened my eyes. Notifications lit up the lock screen. Messages from mutual friends, coworkers, random followers, even local journalists trying to secure a quote. Tasha's quiet strength had somehow become the calm center of a viral storm, and Karen, now dubbed Cane Karen across half the internet, had become the antagonist of the week. Overnight, the story had been picked up by several national news outlets, all running different headlines but each more damning than the last. Entitled Woman Attacks Blind Shopper, Caught on Camera. Woman Slaps Blind Cousin, Crowd Responds. Disability Advocate Assaulted, Stranger Thought Her Cane Was a Weapon. The headlines were dramatic, and while I knew they were meant to catch clicks, the truth was buried inside each one. It had happened. It was real. And now the entire country knew about it. Tasha sat quietly on my couch with a blanket draped around her shoulders, phone in her lap, untouched. She wasn't avoiding the coverage exactly. She just didn't seem interested in absorbing more of it. She had spent the night in my guest room after everything, and while she hadn't said much about how she felt, her silence said plenty. There was a weight in the way she moved, deliberate and cautious, like her body was still processing what had happened even if her mind had already accepted it. I didn't push her. I just made coffee, checked our messages, and did what I could to filter through the avalanche of information piling up. A disability rights organization had reached out and offered support. A local nonprofit had asked if Tasha would be willing to speak at one of their events. A tech company messaged, offering to send her some accessibility gear for free. There were even a few brands tagging her in posts, trying to jump on the viral moment like it was a marketing opportunity. That part disgusted me a little. Clout vultures, they always circled the loudest fires. What struck me the most was how people online had started calling her brave, strong, and powerful, terms usually reserved for activists or public figures who planned their appearances. But Tasha hadn't chosen this. She had simply gone out to get a smoothie, hopping for a quiet afternoon with her cousin, and now she was being cast as a symbol. It was both flattering and exhausting, and she felt the latter more than anything. "I didn't do anything," she said softly as I handed her a cup of coffee. "I just existed, and someone decided that was threatening." I didn't have a clever reply to that. I sat next to her, nodded, and let the weight of her words sit in the room like a silent echo. The truth was, she had done something. She had held her ground. She had refused to shrink under ignorance, but I understood what she meant. She hadn't signed up to be the face of a viral movement. She hadn't asked for any of it. Meanwhile, the fallout for Karen was getting worse by the hour. Her name, now public knowledge thanks to social sleuths, was trending on several platforms. People had discovered old posts from her Facebook account, revealing years of aggressive rants, entitlement-soaked complaints about customer service, and thinly veiled ableist comments about how certain people should stay home if they couldn't function in society. The internet had receipts, and it was relentless. The comments on her business page had turned into a flood of one-star reviews, and when the company finally pulled the plug and fired her, a copy of the termination letter somehow made its way online. It was brutal and direct, stating that her actions violated ethical standards and damaged the company's reputation beyond repair. Karen had not only lost her job, she had lost her digital anonymity. And whether she deserved it or not, she had become a living cautionary tale of what happens when cruelty meets camera phones. Tasha finally opened her phone, scrolled briefly, and sighed. "I don't want to live my life on the defense," she said, "but every time something like this happens, it feels like I have to prove I belong in public." I felt a burn in my throat, a kind of helpless anger that I couldn't quite swallow. All I wanted was for her to feel safe, seen, and respected, not as a symbol, not as a trending story, but as a person. I told her that, and she smiled, a little grateful but not comforted. "They'll forget me in a week," she said, "but people like her, they're always going to be out there, watching, judging." That was the part that hit the hardest, because she wasn't wrong. Later that day, we decided to go for a walk just to get some air and maybe try to return to something that resembled normal. As soon as we stepped outside, though, we realized how impossible that would be. At the end of the block, a car slowed as it passed us, and the driver rolled down his window. "Hey," he called out, smiling. "You're the girl from the video, right? That Karen got what she deserved. Glad you're okay." Tasha gave a polite nod, smiled faintly, and kept walking. Another block later, a woman at a crosswalk gasped and pulled out her phone. "Oh my God, it's you. Can I take a picture?" Tasha declined gently. We kept moving. It happened again at the park. A couple sitting on a bench whispered excitedly and pointed like they had just spotted a celebrity. Tasha tried to laugh it off, but I could see her shoulders tensing each time. Her anonymity had been stripped from her without her consent, and now she was navigating a new world where her trauma was a viral moment and her face was a meme. When we got back, she collapsed onto the couch, kicked off her shoes, and stared at the ceiling. "I didn't want to be famous," she murmured. "I just wanted a smoothie." That one line stuck with me more than anything else. It captured everything so perfectly: the absurdity, the injustice, the way one person's ignorance had turned an ordinary day into a permanent memory burned into the internet forever. I sat down next to her again, unsure of what to say, but determined to stay by her side through whatever came next. The internet would move on eventually. Another video, another Karen, another moment of collective outrage. But Tasha's story wouldn't disappear, not for her, and not for the people who had seen it and finally understood, maybe for the first time, what it felt like to live in a world that questioned your very presence. The thing about going viral is that it amplifies everything: truth, pain, solidarity, and spectacle. And while some people were just there for the drama, others were truly listening. Messages poured in from strangers who thanked Tasha for her courage, who shared their own stories of ableism, who saw themselves in her quiet composure and found strength in it. Maybe that's what made it all worthwhile in the end, Not the attention or the headlines, but the connection. The proof that even when one person decides to lash out, there are thousands more willing to stand up, speak out, and say enough is enough. The days that followed felt like the slow, strange descent after a roller coaster that had shaken us so hard, we weren't quite sure where it began or when it would end. The video had crested in virality, interviews requested, news anchors debating ableism in modern society, commentators trying to spin narratives, think pieces dissecting Karen's meltdown, and even a few celebrities chiming in on social media with statements like "respect the Kane," "respect the person." There was a flood of awareness campaigns and hashtags trending for a few days, ranging from sincere to opportunistic, as the online machine worked overtime to wring every drop of momentum from the incident. For Tasha, who hadn't wanted any of this to begin with, the attention became suffocating. She found herself being recognized nearly everywhere we went, whether it was the grocery store or the pharmacy, always approached with the same awkward mix of sympathy and admiration, always reminded that her worst day had become someone else's teachable moment. What made it worse, I think, was the way people often tried to console her with the phrase, "At least justice was served," as though that erased the sting of being humiliated and struck in public. Yes, Karen had been arrested. Yes, she had lost her job. Yes, her reputation had crumbled to dust under the weight of her own arrogance and the brutal permanence of the internet. But none of that undid what had been done. The slap had been just one part of it. The bigger wound had been inflicted by the words, the disbelief, the venomous insistence that Tasha's cane was not a tool but a weapon, that her disability was a threat, her presence a problem to be managed. Justice, in its viral form, had been swift and loud, but it hadn't soothed the ache beneath the surface, and it certainly hadn't made the world any less difficult to navigate. Still, something had changed, not in the world maybe, but in how people saw Tasha. Before, her blindness was something others tiptoed around, afraid of saying the wrong thing, unsure whether to offer help or let her be. Now, after the video, people approached her like a symbol. They expected grace, wisdom, strength, but Tasha was just a person. A kind, clever, sometimes sarcastic, always thoughtful person who wanted to be able to move through life without being treated like a burden or a spectacle. And yet, because the internet had seen her stand tall in the face of cruelty, it demanded she remain that way, forever poised, forever strong. No one wanted to see her cry or be angry or overwhelmed. That wasn't the story they'd signed up for. One afternoon, about a week after the incident, Tasha and I sat in her apartment, the hum of a floor fan mixing with the faint sound of birds outside the window. We hadn't looked at the news all day. No headlines, no alerts, no updates on the latest viral moment. We turned it all off, craving quiet like a starving person craves food. Tasha had a notebook in her lap, something she often used to jot down thoughts and poems. She hadn't touched it in days, but now she was scribbling again slowly, the lines long and flowing. I didn't ask what she was writing, I just let her be. At one point she paused, looked over at me and asked, "Do you think people really learned anything from all of this?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe the outpouring of support and outrage had planted seeds of empathy in people's minds. But the truth was, I didn't know. People moved on so quickly. Outrage was currency, but empathy required patience, and patience was in short supply online. "I think some people did," I said carefully. "Not everyone, but maybe enough." She nodded slowly, not convinced, but not dismissive either. "I guess I'm just tired of having to educate people by surviving their ignorance," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm tired of needing to be a lesson." That sentence hung in the air like a church bell after the strike, deep and echoing. There was nothing I could say that would fix that feeling, and maybe that was the point. Some wounds aren't meant to be fixed by words. They need time, space, quiet. That weekend, a small community center invited Tasha to speak at an event focused on disability awareness. She was hesitant at first. She didn't want to be put on display, didn't want to feel like she had to perform strength for strangers. But after some thought, she agreed, not because she felt obligated, but because she realized there was power in choosing to speak on her own terms. When she stepped onto the modest little stage, the room full of folding chairs and curious faces, she didn't start with a viral recap. She didn't dwell on Cairn or the slap or the video. Instead, she talked about what it meant to live with a disability in a world that often didn't want to acknowledge it. She talked about navigating spaces designed without people like her in mind, about the quiet stares in public, about the microaggressions, the unsolicited advice, the assumption that blindness equated to weakness. She ended with a line that stayed with me long after the applause had faded. Respect isn't a reaction to going viral. It's something we should offer before the camera ever comes out. That sentence, in all its quiet authority, was the real lesson, the one too complex for memes and TikTok edits. It was the truth she had always carried, even when no one was looking. In the end, the internet did what it always does. The fury cooled, the algorithms shifted, a new video surfaced. Another cairn, another confrontation, another wave of outrage. Tasha's story became a link in a long chain, one that people clicked less and less as time went on. But for those who truly listened, who paused long enough to hear her words and not just see her go viral, something remained. A quiet awareness, a deeper respect. And for Tasha, life went on. Not as a symbol, not as a headline, but as herself. She kept writing, she kept walking, she kept being exactly who she was before the slap, resilient, sharp, endlessly kind. But now people moved aside for her in public, not out of pity but out of awareness. Not everyone, but enough. And that, in the end, was its own kind of justice. As for Cairn, well, she disappeared from the public eye, deleted her accounts, went quiet. Maybe she learned something, maybe not. But she became a name people invoked when talking about entitlement pushed too far. She became a warning, a footnote, a lesson in what happens when ignorance collides with accountability under the unforgiving light of a phone camera. And the cane she once saw as a weapon, it was never meant to harm anyone. But in the hands of the right person, it turned out to be something far more powerful, a symbol of strength, of presence, and of visibility in a world that still too often tries to look the other way.